Welcome to Level Up, a podcast for independent artists navigating the Asian music industry. I'm your host, Giselle Koh. I'm a music journalist, the founder of platform Asian Pop Weekly, and an all-around Mandopop nerd. Join me in taking control of your career as an artist, and I'll show you how to make the most of it. Hey guys, welcome back again to the Level Up podcast. As we continue our little segue into the topic of mental health for independent artists, we wanted to also take things from the perspective of an artist themselves and ask them a little bit about the mental health challenges they might have had in the past, and also how this interacts with their artistry and their creativity, and also, their position as a business person if, they're trying to make music a sustainable business for themselves. So this week I invited my friend and singer-songwriter Marcus Lee to join us on the podcast. Marcus is a Singaporean singer-songwriter who has actually been in the industry for quite a while at this point. He first gained visibility when he participated in a reality singing competition when he was still in school, but his passion for music allowed him to continue pursuing this dream, and he recently just released his latest album, For You I Can, 为了你我可以, 100% independently. And seeing him and chatting with him previously about the journey that he's taken and seeing how open he is about his mental health struggles in the past, and I felt that he was the perfect person to invite onto this podcast and have this wonderful conversation with us about what it means to be an independent artist in this day and age, and how mental health, a good foundation in your mental health, can really help you on this journey. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. Hi, Marcus. Thank you so much for joining us on the Level Up podcast. Before we start, do you want to quickly introduce yourself to our audiences?
Oh, sure. Hi, Giselle. My name is Marcus, and I'm an independent singer-songwriter, and I mostly release songs in Mandarin, so in Chinese. But today we're going to do an interview in English, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know English is your first language, so that's not going to be a problem for you.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to talk to you about the topic of mental health and the intersection with artists, because I think this is something that isn't really talked about so much in Singapore, but I think it's something that's very important, especially for all the budding artists out there, because I think it's a very important part of any artist's foundation, right? Your latest song, if I'm not wrong, called I Don't Want to Be This Way, and it's actually about your challenges with mental health. So I wanted to start by asking, what was it that inspired you to write this song?
I think in the first place, I wanted to write, in terms of my music, I was kind of releasing a lot of songs about love,
Mm-hmm.
and about the different challenges and the different the whole process of love. Yeah, but I always wanted to write songs that are about social issues. So one of the issues that are quite close to my heart is about mental health. So I had this tune where I had the chorus kind of went something, 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 and then no, even in demo, when I was just mumbling certain things. Yeah. So immediately I had this concept of I wanted to depict the inner struggles of a person, because I realized a lot of times the song lyrics, it goes it's yes, sometimes we can have moments where we are we would encourage ourselves to be hyping ourselves up, but there are a lot of moments where we will also be quite self-derogatory. So and these two thoughts can happen at the same time. Yeah, and sometimes it's very hard to even articulate it. I think at the end of the day, this song's message was to say yes to positivity, say no to the negativity, but not just to say no, but to acknowledge it first. Yeah, because I think that's the first step. Yeah, so that's why the song is called I Don't Want to Be This Way. I don't have a specific incident, but I think it's in terms of a generic sense of how I've been dealing with issues of self-doubt, maybe overthinking.
Right, right.
Yeah.
With identification, you brought up like a very important point, because as that being like the first step, and I feel like not everyone has, you have the yes moments and you have the no moments, but I know that some of those yes moments you created yourself to like keep yourself staying positive and things like that. Whereas some people don't really even know how to do that when they get into like those negative hit spaces. So I think that's like really awesome. I also wanted to talk about, because I know that other than being on this mental health journey and being very open about it, you've also been an independent artist for like probably like most of your career, right? So I'm sure that there have been many opportunities along the way to work with labels and all that kind of thing. But what was it that really like inspired you to continue working as an independent artist?
I think people maybe would have the desire to like, okay, I want, before I put out a lot of my music, I want to secure maybe a collaborator or like a label to work with. But for me, when I started, the decision to be independent was more out of like a necessity, in terms of like I wanted to release music ASAP. I think being independent definitely gives me that freedom, and also the in terms of like leveraging time lah. Yeah. So I think for me it was more of like I did it out of a need, and I think along the way going about it, yes, it's its challenges in terms of like the practical aspect, but also in terms of like the mental aspect also, without because I guess when you're in a label, you also have a team. So maybe without like a team behind, sometimes a lot of the decisions are made solely on me lah. So in a sense, like the pressure is, I do feel the pressure a lot of the time. And I think how I deal with that is probably to be very open with how I'm feeling. And also, I think along the years, maybe at the start, I wasn't able to be very like I just wasn't able to like articulate a lot of the things that I was going. As time went on, I think I was able to learn how to identify different thresholds. Yeah, just noticing certain behavioral patterns. Yeah, whether like sometimes it's just even like the quality of my sleep. Yeah, these things also like can tell me, like my body also will tell me.
True. Yeah. And would you say that's like been very important, that journey for your mental health, in terms of helping you to make your independent career like sustainable? Because for me, I feel like why I think like mental health is so important for musicians to understand is because at that point in time when like you don't have a team, you need to be very like secure in yourself. You need to be able to tell yourself where your limits are, like when you need to like stop and rest, because when there's no team around you, there's no one to tell you what to do. Like you might just keep going and going and like burn yourself out, and that's like, that's the big challenge. But at the same time, like the whole point of this podcast is that I feel there's a lot of value in being independent, in learning how to do things yourself, because then you're like more versed in all the decisions like you may have to make, or maybe your label might have to make in the future. So yeah, going back to the point, like do you feel that it was really helpful for you?
Yeah, I think you said you like, yeah, you're spot on in saying like how important this like taking care of one's mental health, because first of all, from a KPI point of view of like trying to achieve things, like I think it's very important also to know where you're at, knowing your limits, and also to know that like we are all like on a learning journey. I think for me also that was important to like a self note, like even though I was releasing music, I think I was also quite clear. I think also I did have this mindset when I first started releasing music. It was that like I might not have the perfect plan, but you know what? I'm just gonna go ahead with my plan, and I'm going to refine my plan along the way, because I can't guarantee also in terms of results as well. Maybe I have certain projections, but I might not be able to fulfill them. But I need to know also like why I didn't fulfill them, and I think being able to like differentiate all of these things would also like help in terms of like trying to deal with with these expectations lah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because as you mentioned, a lot of all these burnout and stuff is like you keep going, but you don't know where to stop, or you don't know when.
Right.
Your first in terms of like just like output, you don't know when to when it's enough, and also you don't know like how much to achieve before you can like stop. So I think it's both ways. You need to see where have manageable expectations, and also be able to like have like that physical or like mental like rest as well. Like there was a period of time where I also decided to go for therapy. Yeah, so I think I never ever expected myself going for therapy, to be honest, because even in going in pursuing this journey on doing music, I thought I was quite secure. I thought I was quite safe because I had very close friends around me. I had like mentors around me who I can that I often confided my feelings or my emotions with lah. Yeah. I didn't really think about therapy as a first option, but I think somehow talking to different friends, and then they all somehow like mentioned therapy at the same time. So I decided, okay, maybe this was last year. Like, it was a new year, and in 2021, I wanted to do something new, and towards the end of year, reflecting about like the past year, I realized that okay, I have some of these like negative thoughts, like what I was sharing just now, like some of these inner things that I wanted to deal with better. So I decided to try out therapy, and I think seeking professional help, even though maybe I wasn't diagnosed with anything like quote unquote serious, but nonetheless I still felt that like the whole process was very helpful, and I learned two things. I think I can share two things.
Awesome.
One thing was to practice being grateful, thankfulness, or like gratitude. And the second one is knowing things that I can control versus things I cannot control. Yeah. So I'll elaborate first on the first point. The first point on practicing like thankfulness, that really helps put a lot of the achievements into perspective. Because when I'm like, a lot of times it's like, even whether, I think at any point of one's career, there's always another thing that you can.
Yeah, it's something else that you're reaching for. Something else you want. Yeah.
So it's like you can be like, okay, you achieve this, but there's the next thing. There's the next thing. There's the next thing. So I practice like to be grateful, to be thankful for it. It helps me to like celebrate that first win, and I think that's very helpful in like being able to give yourself some credit. Yes, that gives you to go on to the next thing, and also helps you to like finish and like process that achievement. Like for myself, like doing just releasing my album was like maybe a big thing, but maybe in the grand scheme of things, it's like, oh, it's the beginning. But I think I needed to spend a lot of time also to celebrate that. And I think right now, I'm still in the process of that, because I'm like, oh man, I'm not doing enough. But like, I still need to remind myself that, oh, you really did. It was no mean feat. It was a good job, well done. And
for sure.
And that only when I process that, then I can continue to.
Yes.
Yeah. The second point on like just being able to differentiate what I can control versus what I cannot control is also very interesting, because a lot of things, if it's not in our hands, maybe it's like maybe the decision, or like it's in like maybe your audience, or like someone else, like a collaborator you're working with. These things are not something you can control. You can control like your actions and maybe your response to other people's actions. So I think when I'm able to like differentiate this, then I also put less pressure on myself, to try to achieve or try to change or try to do everything. Yeah. So I think these two things are quite good handles that I took away from like a professional help, someone able to like take my case, and also like to to see it from like unbiased point of view, because I think sometimes, you know, when you talk about like friends and family, maybe they also have like blind spots, or they also sometimes personally also for me as a friend, maybe I might not be in a position to speak that directly.
Yes.
For certain issues. Yeah.
Yes.
So sometimes maybe hearing it from a third party, it's really like unbiased, and for them they also have a lot more insight towards a certain issue. Yeah. So I think I would recommend if you can and of course I think a lot of people, first is like the stigma or like the cost, but I think the way I see it is like investing in yourself, time, and also of course money, you know, in yourself.
Yeah.
It was worth it lah. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for sharing all of that. I think in Australia, like the perspective is very different to in Singapore, because, for example, like as part of the basic healthcare that like every Australian person gets, they get like 10 therapy sessions, and like you should use it up, right? I mean, that's why it's there to encourage you to take care of your mental health. Whereas here, I feel that people still see it a lot more as like just a touch and go thing, like, oh, when you're like really, really depressed, or like actually maybe clinically depressed or something like that, that's when you should go and seek help. And it's maybe once you get better after like a couple sessions, then it's done. But I don't think that it should be seen in that way. Of course, I understand that like money is one thing, like it's not cheap in Singapore, especially to have long-term therapy sessions. But as you said, it is about investing in yourself. And I totally understand where you're coming from when you're talking about like how you feel it's different from like getting help from your family or your friends, because, for example, these other friends, if they're also artists, they might be in the same situation as you, and yes, they can relate to you and what you're going through, but they might not even have found a way to manage those emotions in the best way possible for themselves. So you maybe just kind of be like circling and circling, or like just it might even turn into like a complaint session, which doesn't actually really solve anything. Where I think that's where like and family as well, like they are not in the industry, and maybe they might not have the time to really understand every step of the way what you're going through as well. So in that sense, I think therapy is really a very, very, very good and efficient way for you to continue on your journey, like continue and always and constantly get feedback on like how you can be better, how you can take better care of yourself. And it was also really interesting when you shared those 2 points that you learned, because when I spoke to the music therapist, Asami, in our previous episode, I actually gave her some points that I thought, okay, like these are some situations that artists frequently face. So it was maybe like, you know, financial instability, like complete reliance on ourselves, blah, 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 like a couple of these kinds of things. And so she gave me feedback based on that. But I also think that these 2 points that you gave me is actually pretty different from what feedback she was giving me or what I was telling her. So I think it's really great to have your perspective on that. And definitely being grateful is and like knowing what you can control and what you can't control is very important, like not only for artists but also, you know, for just people. Yeah. So I wanted to go a little bit backwards and talk a little bit more about why you were inspired to, you know, go on this journey where you felt like you needed therapy. Because were there any like particular like milestone challenges or like experiences as an artist that really made you realize that, okay, I need to do something, or in general just like, you know, made you realize the importance of taking care of your mental health?
Let me go back a little bit.
I
think I think at the end of 2020, that was when COVID first started, right?
Yeah.
And then I think that was also 2020 was also a year where I kind of like was starting out releasing more music. I released my first single in late 2019. Then 2020 was like executing some of the plans. And because of COVID, a lot of my plans kind of like got shelved, or I had to like, you know, rehash them. And the whole process of doing that and preparing, it was the lead up preparing to release more music, to release the album eventually. I think a lot of the times I found myself in that situation that I was explaining before, like I felt like I was doing at every juncture, at every release, I always felt like I was not doing enough somehow. And I always like beat myself up for it. I would always wonder like what else could I have done it better, and like what I needed to do. And I wouldn't like what I shared just now, like, I think that was to be like the ideal situation where I celebrate small wins and stuff. I think in my thought process was always like, I think first of all, maybe the context of me starting music is also quite important, because for me, my first, when I decided to do music, it was after I graduated from university. So, and I didn't study music. So, and I was 25 when I did that. So I think for that, the whole, like the context in which I started created some insecurity for a place on myself, or some expectations placed on myself. Firstly, like, I decided to pursue something that's different from my, from what I was studying. And second, also, I felt like compared to maybe artists that have come before, I was starting at maybe at a later time. So I felt like I needed to, 抓紧时间. I really need to use my time very wisely. But because of this, then I think a lot of like expectations were like came about, or like
right.
I started to put a lot of these on myself, and I wasn't really right now I can articulate it because because I've already been through that process. But at that point of time, I didn't realize that this was taking such a big toll. I thought this was like, having all these expectations were normal, or like this is what is expected of me. Like,
right.
I can't rest. I think there was a period of time also where I told myself like I can't go out, I punished myself my not going out to have fun on weekends, or like when friends would go out for drinking, I was like I can't do it because it's my time to suffer. I remember I had these thoughts like in my head, and I realized they were wrong, but I didn't really like know how to like deal with this whole thing.
Yeah.
So that also, and somehow, so my inability to handle that, plus also the fact that like I just heard different friends also sharing about their own therapy experiences, or sharing like, oh, I have a friend who's a therapist that's doing this. So like I piece all the things together. That gave me the first like
motivation.
Like,
yeah.
The first to like, to even consider
it.
That was like where I was at, like, and also like in at the end of 2020, I knew that 2021 was going to be a challenging year. So I think I had a bit of foresight in that, and then I decided to like maybe I need to deal with myself. So that's why I even like got started. I didn't really feel the stigma. I think personally I didn't feel that, but I was worried about like what other people would think. So I didn't tell my parents. So if my parents watch this, then okay, because it's a bit awkward. I didn't really want to have to like explain the situation thing. Yeah. But
I mean,
my friends, when I said that, I'm going for therapy, I realized that actually a lot of other people are also trying to go for therapy. So it's kind of a bit of like when you start the conversation and then you realize that everyone's the same. Yeah.
Yes. I think
I found it quite encouraging as well.
Yeah, I think definitely for me, like talking about stigma, it's something that you can't see, like it's intangible, and sometimes you don't feel that it's there. But for example, you feeling like you don't want to talk to your parents about it, or maybe even like the structures, the way that society is structured at this point in time, I think the stigma does exist. But of course, within your close circles with your friends, you should feel comfortable to talk to them about this kind of stuff. But I like what you said about how when you opened up about it, other people also opened up about it. And that's what I think that's how you like start those conversations, because for example, I see a psychologist regularly just because. And when I started talking to my friends about it and just sharing openly that I've been, and then they're like, oh, so how can I, like, how can I start as well? Because I see that it's really helping you. So yeah, I think it's really important to at least, start from people that you're comfortable with and like be open with them, because I feel that with friendships, you have to be open with them. If not, you can't make that friendship closer. You can't really be sharing parts of your life with them, and they don't know you the way that you would like them to know you. So I think it's very important for any relationship to be like more open about these kinds of things. And I'm glad you have that space for yourself as well.
Yeah. I mean, on that is like, you have when you share something deep, and that would inspire
D&M, deep and meaningful conversations.
And that will also like be a indicator also to the other person to like, oh, okay, I can talk about this. Maybe you don't get it started, then no one knows how much to say or what to say.
Exactly. And sometimes you just have to take that first step. And I think more so in Singapore or like in Asian countries than other places, because like, as I said, there is a little bit of a stigma of talking about these kinds of emotions, like more complex emotions in your daily routine, or even just with friends, that I feel anyway. Like, for example, in Australia, I think, for example, like if you're at the office and then someone's like, oh, how are you? And then you're like, oh, like, I've had a bad day. And then they will actually like be like, oh, how, like what? And they'll ask you about it, even though they're not like close friends or something like that. That's just how things work. So I think there's a very different approach to how these things work in different societies. Whereas here, like, I don't know, I feel that you wouldn't necessarily be encouraged to talk about those things because people don't just like randomly ask you how are you and expect you to reply them with like what's been going on in your life. Right. So yeah, I think that's Yeah,
I think that was also the reason why I really wanted to I think when for me, like, songs and stories are all conversation starters also. So I really wanted to get this conversation going, to participate in this maybe you can say it's a movement, or like in the conversation. And releasing the song, like when I did I Don't Want to Be This Way, the song about like mental health and the whole journey of that, that opened up quite a lot of like doors and a lot of opportunity to like talk about this issue. Then I realized that, like, whether it's like friends or like, my followers, like, if I didn't release this song, I wouldn't have this conversation.
Yeah. So you wouldn't be having this conversation with me right now.
Yeah. You wouldn't know that I would, that there's something in my heart. So I think like that was definitely one of the things that I thought about when I was like when I was writing. I was like, it was a bit scary also, because like, okay, if I put out a song like this, then it's like, it means that I need to be very open and very transparent. And then it's like, oh, am I allowed to be so vulnerable, or is it very good for my image, that kind of thing. But I think after a while, just like, I think 也是想太多, so it's too much. Me also overthinking.
Yeah, you just need to give yourself permission to be open. Yeah. I think it's very admirable that you are talking about these issues, because another thing that I talked about in our last interview with the music therapist Asami was that sometimes artists use their platforms to talk about these social issues. And she was saying that actually, like, it is takes a lot of energy, and it might actually be quite triggering for artists to be talking about these vulnerable issues, or for example, like trauma that they've been through in the past. So she was actually saying, like, from her perspective, she was like, this should not be, put on the shoulders of artists. Like, they shouldn't have to, be ambassadors for like, social justice causes and things like that, because they're already tasked with so many other things. Like, you have to be the person putting the music out, you have to like manage your own public image, all these kinds of things. But one thing that I responded to her was that I think some artists, such as yourself, like, it very naturally falls in step with like the rest of your process in wanting to share these stories and wanting to be part of these causes. So in those situations, then it works. But obviously, if you're just using it as a gimmick, then you're going to get like hurt in the process, right? Like just using mental health or like, you know, your trauma as a way to market your product. That's not going to work. And it's going to be very, very tiring for yourself. But I wanted to ask, like, as you were taking all these interviews and talking about these things, do you feel that it was like uncomfortable for you or like tiring, or like did you have to like take some time off or anything like that, or was it like pretty okay for you, pretty smooth?
Personally, it was pretty okay. And I think, as I mentioned, like the fact that I was able to like conduct, I'm not conducting, but like to engage in these conversations, even at this level, showed me like there was a certain like maturity of thought.
I see.
Yeah, so it was an indicator for me to be able to like that. Of course, like I think before taking up or like going on to whether it's like I was mentioning the workshop or like taking up interviews or even like sharing personally also my stories, I think I had to go through my own process also to make sure that at least I found some kind of like conclusion or like some kind of like, there's never like a conclusion also in some sense, but maybe at the best of my ability at this point of time, I have already found some kind of like peace towards the situation. And because of that, I'm able to talk about it. I think if you're in the process of still finding peace or finding like stability in terms of like your inner life or that condition, then I think wouldn't be advised to be so open about things as of yet.
Yeah, but you were just in a right state of mind to like take this challenge on, and in doing that was actually an achievement for you as well, right? Because it showed you that you can do this, you can have these conversations.
I also think the fact that maybe what I'm hearing sometimes, like as you mentioned about your previous conversation with the music therapist, like some of these things can be like quite stressful or can bring up trauma. I think some of these things also, they need to be processed. And second is also like, you know, this idea of being an ambassador. What does that mean, right? Does an ambassador have to have it all together all the time, have to be perfect? So all these thoughts are also like kind of like self-inflicted as well.
Yes.
So if you're an ambassador, so sometimes you might not have it together. Maybe for the interest of your own self, maybe you would not take up a certain thing, or you might not want to say, or you would want to be okay to say that you're not okay, right? It's the cliche phrase, right? It's okay to not be okay.
Not be okay.
unless you're portraying a certain thing, but you know how much of that is true, how much of that is really what you feel. So I think it's also I'm like kind of like begging the question, right? It's like what does it mean to be an ambassador for a certain cause? Do you have to be perfect? I think that maybe in terms of society's point of view is that yes, if you say that you're a champion for this, for that, you have to have it all together. But I don't think that's the case a lot of the time.
Yes, for sure.
Because of those pressures to be, I won't say be accountable.
Be perfect. Yeah. I see.
That is where there's like unhealthy expectations set already. So I think if that's what society is placing on let's say in the artist or like the team or whatever, then I think then it is also the team or the artist's prerogative to like deal with these expectations also, and like be able to maybe address this either publicly to their fans or to or maybe personally to like deal with this
for sure. I think this is a very important point you brought up, and an important question as well. Like, what does it mean to be an ambassador for something? And personally, I feel like every artist is different. That's why like they should all have their own paths. Some may choose to like talk about these issues, some may not. But I think that it's really about renegotiating like with yourself. What does it mean, and how is this going to sit right with you, and how important do you feel it is for you to be part of this cause? And I think everyone is at different places in their journey and seeing different impacts on it. So I think that's something that every artist has to think about for themselves and really come to, as you said, not a like final conclusion, but they need to come to some kind of like consensus about whether or not they're actually truly ready to do this. And but so going off of your point, then, for example, when you are reaching those triggers, like, do you have, I think it's really about awareness, right? It's about like knowing when you're like about to reach your breaking point, and then you're like, okay, like I have to do something about it. For you, like, how do you, when you're approaching those triggers, how do you manage that? Like, how do you manage to like mitigate the situation so you don't just like, have a breakdown or something?
Right. I think for me, I think what I mentioned, like those 2 points help. So, but before I can even like, of course, have that, I also need to like reflect and also try to like process what am I exactly feeling. Yeah. So I think a lot for me is like, I like to articulate these my emotions. And when I actually speak them out, I kind of like figure out along the way. I kind of get light bulb moments like whenever I talk. Yeah. So I do have friends that I talk about it. Or another way is also is that I journal or I write things out. And as I'm writing, because in the process of like writing, I'm also like thinking about what to write. And then it's just as I'm talking or as I'm writing, I would get like epiphanies of like, oh, this is what I'm feeling. And this feeling to this. Then it's like, okay, I see why I feel this way. Yeah. And like of course, having those tools and handles, I would apply them. And I think another thing that I mentioned just now is also about my body. So I think sometimes I might also feel and this is something that I realize is quite prevalent in terms of like people suffering from mental health conditions, is that when you have like certain maybe negative thoughts, it might also lead to your physical body also being affected, or it would show in physically as well. Yeah, so a lot of people say that like in terms of like their mood, in terms of like their sleep, or in terms of just like their they just feel tired all the time, or like fall sick. Yeah. So for me, I haven't had personally, I haven't reached a stage of like I fall sick, but I think I would notice that like I would not be getting like quality sleep, or I notice that I would feel a lot more tired than I would usually do. Like maybe, for example, I'm doing like a certain task, like maybe recording, and like maybe so I know like how much it requires for me to do that, but maybe a certain day, like it's like one of those days where I'm not feeling so good. It becomes like a much more daunting task.
Yeah.
So when I have the comparison, then I know like, okay, maybe this also tells me like, okay, I'm feeling this way.
Yeah.
I need to take a break. I got to clear whatever I need to do, and I just got to like take a break.
Yes.
Like I think like being able to put that into your schedule, because I think there's something also I maybe practically something I learned also is that like putting rest, into my schedule. Yeah. Like other than putting in like meetings or like I need to do this, that was also something that was helpful. So I think just being able to identify the triggers, I think is very personal things. But of course, like even as I share, maybe some people will relate to it also.
Of course.
And about like that's why the conversation is important, when you hear different perspectives and then you see what like kind of works for you. I mean, all these also from hearing other people, seeking help, or even like, going through it myself also. Yeah, you can, I think right now there's a lot of information also available, which is the good thing. Yeah. Because I think this whole topic of mental health is being discussed a lot more today. Also because just the stressful world we live in now. Yeah, the digital realm is quite unforgiving a lot of times. Whether it's an artist, it's like, even as a normal person.
Yes. Thanks so much for
Just
sharing. Yeah, that was really it was a really nice to hear your perspective on that, because I also never really like thought about it from that perspective about how you like manage. And but I definitely think like learning to put rest in your schedule also for me, that was something that I learned in like the last year. Because like recently, like I mean previously I didn't really like do that. I was just like, okay, I just need to work. And then I realized like, okay, like sometimes you just need to just like drop everything and just like take a break and then come back to it, you know. So thanks so much for sharing that. And I also wanted to go back to your point about you know, how as artists you have to stay vulnerable and open at all times, because that's how you connect with your audiences, and that's how that's like the best way to tell your story. Because if you're not being genuine, if you're not being authentic, then people don't, you know, like there might be some backlash basically. So I wanted to know a little bit more about like, how do you manage to stay vulnerable, and if there are times where you feel like, okay, like maybe do you like block out time for yourself, or how do you set your boundaries in order to manage your vulnerability and your public image?
okay. Of course, like when I prepare for like maybe a文案, like a copy, or like when I prepare like story, actually I don't really think about preparing myself. I think it's also at a point of like wanting to share certain thing. I think I would already ask myself like, am I comfortable to share this information, and how comfortable would I be to have this you know, I would my barometer would be like, okay, if this were like translated into like an article and then everyone would have access to read it, would I be okay with that? And I think if I'm okay with that, then I can talk about it. So I think internally, before I make the choice to like maybe write something or publish something, I am already accountable to like myself and my emotions, and like maybe not even just my emotions, because sometimes the story is not just myself, right? It's like the other person also. Yeah. I mean, this is in regards to like whether it's like love, or whether it's like sometimes it could be a mental health condition, or maybe a certain situation they're in. Maybe you also want like certain privacy of the other person. So I think I'm also like, I think these are things that I you can say, is it a checklist or is it an internal thing that I do?
It's like before, a filter, maybe.
Yeah. Even before like I say anything out. Yeah. So even before I'm like writing about or like preparing like the press release or whatever, that like before that is done, I've already like gone through this like thought process.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful actually. I never thought about it from that perspective, but I guess we live in like a very digital age now. So like everyone's thought process is based on like, okay, I finished this song and like I'm prepping to like release it to the world. And then that's when you start thinking about these things. So that's really cool. That's good to know.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for asking also, because like I didn't realize that I was doing this also.
Yeah, I mean, this is new to me. This is like totally new to me. But I think it's important for artists to also be aware of, just because you have a public image doesn't mean like your entire life is accountable to the public. So I think that's why I feel like for artists especially, there need to be like boundaries in place, you know, so that you know that at certain points in time or in certain spaces, in certain places, you don't have to share everything. You don't have to. That I think this is something that the music therapist and I talked about as well, where she was saying like, you can choose who you want to be open and vulnerable with. You don't have to be open and vulnerable to everyone. And I think that's something that we're all just learning, you know? Yeah.
A lot of times, even as like an artist also, I think I'm also quite fearful about like what other people will say about me in that sense, right? So because of that, it also makes me want to want to do be want to do, or like, what's that word in English? Like 我会妥协. I would negotiate. I would just like give in, I would just give in to certain things. I don't have like my own like boundaries like in that sense.
Yeah.
Like I think like definitely what you said, like it's important to like just set them, know your boundaries. Yeah. But they also sometimes you also need to be put in a situation where you need to exercise those boundaries. You know that you
exactly.
don't know that you need it, then then there isn't an awareness of doing that.
Exactly.
Recently there was a post by Chelsea Cutler. I think
I saw. Social media, right?
She talked about the whole idea of that there's like a pressure to show your whole life on social media, and because that's the best way to be engaging, or it's the best way, because everyone's doing it. But sometimes that also creates that pressure. I think that was what came to mind, when you talk about like that forced accountability or forced vulnerability in that sense. Yeah. I think like because vlogging or is something that is so common nowadays, not just with like artists, but as with everyone. So it becomes like next trend. But then like for some people, if you're not, maybe if you're a more private person, you don't prefer to showcase all these things. And I think so this whole idea of like the perfect life, which is like instant, like don't say the actual one. Like say like on social media, right? Like social media also creates a lot of like pressure to look good and to like appear to have it all together. So I think that in itself, like whether it's pictures or videos, like that really, like I would compare myself to other people, or like everyone will compare yourself to other people, and it's so easy to do that. You're comparing against like everyone's best, and you're not comparing against one person. You're comparing against like a big ball of like
swipe of just like random content from everywhere. Yeah.
And sometimes and that is like it's very heavy. I think it becomes very heavy. And I think that's where I start to go back to my point number one, which is to be grateful for my journey. And I think sometimes it's like when you're measuring your growth, you're measuring your process, actually you're measuring against yourself. You might have someone or a certain like point that you are aiming towards, but in terms of like how you're progressing is against yourself. Sometimes these perspectives gets like clouded, or like gets poisoned by social media implications.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is also something that, I mean, you hear people talking about it a lot, but it's not until you really like have that awareness and you realize like this is happening to me as well, this is affecting me, that you realize you need to do something about it. And I think not enough people have that awareness, because so many people just rely on social media like so much that they kind of don't take care of like their mental health. They don't realize like how it affects their mental health. So it was great of you to point that out as well. Yeah, I think one of the last things I wanted to talk about was imposter syndrome, because I feel like this is something that artists like face a lot, because as we've talked about a lot, like you have to be vulnerable, but in being vulnerable there's like a lot of self-doubt, and there's a lot of feeling like you shouldn't be in this position, you know what I mean? And like I'm sure this is something you faced before. Could you share some experiences with it and like how you dealt with it?
All the time. I'm true and true.
Wow. Okay.
No, it's in the feeling of like, I think even you don't even talk about like from a sharing your story point of view, even from like doing music, it's like I just think like I suck. What a wow.
Yeah.
I think like, good enough, because like where I'm at, I'm like wow, I really feel like I think this is something I'm also maybe in a process of overcoming. Like the reason why sometimes I would like at this point of time I wouldn't go into teaching at all, because I just feel like I have nothing to give, or like I'm still learning, or I don't feel like in a position where
Right.
I'm good with somebody. For me, lah, I don't know. I think many artists also feel that way. Like they don't feel like they're good enough. Yeah. Like there are 1,001 billion reasons for me to say like why I'm not good enough. And also in the context of like sharing about like my stuff also is that I haven't had it all together. What right? How come I have the right to like, share a certain issue because I'm not an expert at it. Yeah. But as I mentioned, like I think just the other time, a lot of times the stories in which I choose to share are things where that I'm quite comfortable to share with the public already. Like I already processed it within myself, within my close friends. So I'm in terms of the issues that I'm talking about, I'm in a position to like overcome this
Yes.
imposter. I've already dealt with this. Yeah. So that puts me in a better place to like deal with it. But I think in general, this whole imposter syndrome is quite prevalent. I think so. I to be really honest also is like I think I should have more of these conversations with fellow artists also. But sometimes it might be awkward. Yeah.
You gotta push past the awkwardness.
I do think like if I feel it, if some of my like the people who I've talked to also feel it, creatives or even I find that I don't want to be maybe it's, I throw it out to you also. Maybe I'm not sure if this is the case, but I realize that imposter syndrome happens quite a lot in guys, in men. Yeah, quite a lot because of maybe I feel maybe it's also a societal thing. Societal pressure on like men to perform, to do well, right? I think for like right in the context of even love in a relationship, a lot of the time it wouldn't be like for a girl it'll be like, oh, do you love me? But for a guy, the question, like even for myself in a relationship or even in doing life, I'm always asking myself, am I good enough?
Yeah. I see.
It's always like, am I good enough in terms of like my achievements? Am I good enough as a person? Am I good enough as a human being? Yeah.
Right.
So this is something that I'm also like still
processing, like, working on.
To overcome this syndrome. Yeah.
I see. I think that actually it's probably equally faced in guys and girls. It's just that it's processed in a different way, or like it comes out in different situations. Because, for example, like I've seen some research where, for example, if you're applying for a job, you look at the criteria of what's required for this job scope. Usually women would only go for the job. They will only apply for the job if they meet 100% of the criteria. Whereas research have shown that like men are more likely to go for the job even if they only meet, I think it's like either 50% or 80% of the criteria. So I think in that comparison in itself, you do see that women are, they definitely do have imposter syndrome, because they're kind of feeling like, I need to really be like this. I need to be exactly what this outline says I am. If not, I'm not good enough for this job. Whereas guys would just go for it. And that shows that they do have the confidence in that situation to go for that job. So, I think it's like, for example, that's very interesting what you shared about being in a relationship and what you are asking and what the girl is asking in that relationship. So maybe it comes out at different times. But definitely another thing I was going to say is that I think imposter syndrome happens most when you have a pathway that's very obvious, very public to follow. And obviously that's why it happens a lot with artists, because you have so many people that you could compare yourself to, that you are encouraged to compare yourself to. And you have a pathway there because everything is public. Like you see, I don't know, like Jay Cho or something all the way up there, doing this, doing that. And then he gets here, he gets there. Every artist, their strategy is more or less like public, so you can see exactly how it happens and how you go about to like achieve your goals, even though you don't have the full picture, but you have an aim there. You're like, oh, I want to be signed to Warner. I want to like have a regional tour, all that kind of things. That's all information that's easily accessible. And I think that plus the unhealthy need for artists to be like accountable to the public and have this public image, I think it all comes together to like make imposter syndrome like a real problem. And definitely when I talk with my friends who are artists, they are also feeling this way. Personally, I actually, up until recently, I didn't really feel it because I think like with a lot of the things that I do, I realized there's actually no roadmap, especially for the way that I've done things, because I was like so isolated in Perth and like no one has ever done what I've done before, like where, you know, they're like traveling everywhere and like going into these random, you know, random projects in this method. So because there was no one to compare myself to, I felt like, okay, it wasn't so bad, maybe sometimes, but not a lot. But especially recently with like the Indigo thing, that was the time where I felt the most imposter syndrome. I was like, oh my God, I'm literally not good enough to do this. Yeah. So that was an interesting, realization for me.
Right.
Yeah.
But have you managed to like process that on your own?
Yeah. I mean, it mostly happened when I was like in the process of recording like the speaking parts. And then I was like, holy shit, like I'm not a DJ. What am I doing? You know? But then I told myself like, legit, you just need to get it done because you want this, you want to do this. So you just do it, you know, it doesn't matter. And then that's how I got through that process. Yeah. And then I think it's better now. It was just in that production process and putting the entire show together and realizing like, oh, this is actually happening. That was something that was going through my mind, and probably because radio is a more established like form, and there were other DJs, not only like within Indigo, but other DJs that I've heard, and I feel like they're all doing some really cool stuff. So yeah, I think that was mainly where it stemmed from. But I think you just have to tell yourself like, you want this, you want to do this, so just do it. Yeah, doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. Yeah,
and I think what you just said really is good. Like, I think the way to combat that is to tell yourself like, what is your, like, why do you want to do this in the first place? I think a lot of times like 回到起初, right? You go back to like, your truth, your like where it all started.
Yeah,
I think it starts with like a desire, or you feel. Sometimes it's also like you feel that you want to do this because also maybe even from a more like strategic point of view, it's like I'm doing this so that I can have certain visibility or certain like understanding about this part of like, or understanding about doing that or whatever it is. You know, I'm just speaking really generic. Yeah, and if you minus out all the comparisons, then actually it comes from, there is a reason why you did that, or why you want to even do that. It could be so going back to that would always like help to reset the mind.
Yeah.
And not too like affected or bogged down by like or like the expectation stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing, like just figuring out like why you're doing this, and then it will help you push through. And then the second thing that I think really helped me was like, you just need to get this over with. Like, and I think that's also in relation to the theme of like, this feeling won't last forever. And I think in general with mental health, that's also something that's really important that you keep telling yourself, because if you're feeling bad at one point in time, like you just have to tell yourself it will be over at some point. You don't know when, but it will. And I think that's something that has helped me like when I'm feeling down as well. Yeah. So those two things in that situation for imposter syndrome.
That's good.
Yeah. Sorry, I have one last question. Do you think that you consider all independent artists as entrepreneurs, or only some? And like, why?
Yes. I don't know if I need to expound on this, but I strongly believe that every artist, if they're doing it, whether it's a full-time or part-time thing, when you're releasing music, I think, okay, the way I entered into doing it, I did approach it from a very entrepreneurial like mindset going to it, because I needed to make sure I was just in terms of like financial situation, like I just make sure that like I was in the black. Like I don't want to be at a loss, right? So my input output.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the way I saw it also, and I think right now whatever I'm doing also is building towards a sustainable future. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm talking about that, like from a very practical standpoint, I think it is very similar to like what building a business would be like. So I think like having a bit more of like business perspective is definitely helpful for a lot of artists.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing is that I think maybe this is also, I think I'm fortunate because this was something that I studied back in school. So I was able to bring in like the soft skills that I learned in higher education in university into whatever I was doing. Yeah, but I also know that a lot of artists might not be empowered with such knowledge. But I think if then Coins learn, right? Like how you might pick up the instruments or pick up, recording stuff. YouTube is great. So and there are quite a lot of like resources and assets, that like I think a local there's one quite good Instagram page as a local one called the Woke Salaryman. That's quite nice.
Okay.
Like,
is that for creatives or just general?
No, but they do talk about freelancers. They do talk about like having your own like balance sheet and things. This is also important. And I think one thing that I also am looking more into is to look more at like statistics in terms of like marketing stuff. So like doing my own growth, my audience growth, my listener base, demographics, these kind of things. I mean, a lot of times it's quite easily accessible from the tools available, whether it's through all the DSPs or your the aggregator you're in. But I think having your own tracker, that's something I am personally trying to get into. So
nice. So I think
very important. It's kind of like you can't escape it lah. I think in an ideal world, you want this to be done by maybe if you're if you have a team behind you, then it would be all this is done by one person lah. Doing more of the finance, the admin, and also like the marketing stuff. But I think as an independent, if you're alone, if you're doing this yourself, then these are things that apart from the creation of music, the distribution of music, and all of that, this is also something that is good to understand a little bit more about.
Yeah, very, very good advice. Very frankly, from my experience, even if they have a team, I don't know if they're thinking about those things that you just mentioned. So I think you're in a very, very good place at the moment. And hopefully, I think for artists, it's like kind of a balance because they have to kind of maintain that creative mindset when they're, and what we spoke about, like being vulnerable, being able to tell your story, and then switching very quickly to like the business perspective. And obviously this isn't always necessary. So for example, if you just love music, like you don't really want to make money from it, that's it, then fine, do it your way. But if you are wanting to make money from it and like have it be sustainable as your career, then I think these are definitely things that you need to think about. But I feel like some artists, maybe because they don't have the soft skills that you have, or there's just like a mental block there that they're like, oh, I don't want to lose my creative side, so maybe I don't want to go over into that territory or something like that. I think it hinders a lot of artists, and everyone needs to find, I think they need to find their own way there in order to achieve like sustainable success. Because even someone once said to me something which I thought was really, really, really good, which was that all artists are independent artists, even if you are a part of like a major label or something like that, which makes a lot of sense because like before you sign with the label, you are an independent artist and you have negotiating power. You have things that they want. That's why you enter into that relationship. And when you're in that relationship, you are still doing negotiating. And I think the entire music industry is moving towards that focus on artists because major labels no longer have the pull that they did before. They are really just leveraging off artist talent and just providing like the funding, but they don't have the ideas anymore. They don't have the creative side because of like social media disrupting everything. So I think artists are even more empowered nowadays to make their own decisions, and they should be educated in making those decisions, as you mentioned. Yeah.
Exactly. Point, yeah. Because every artist is representing themselves, then there is a certain need to have a certain entrepreneurial mindset, whether it's like a small scale or big scale. Like for myself, I'm working towards like, of course, like a career in a sustainable career in music. That's my goal. But even for, let's say, like I just want to release my music, there needs to be also some kind of like, I think it will help lah. I think maybe I know of some people who are like, okay, I just want to make sure a song is out. But I mean, okay, even if let's say you put out a music like, and maybe there's a cost to it, right? Even if you, let's say, to give an example, if you're let's say you do a normal a corporate job and you also have like a side hobby, you also kind of like know your finances, you know how much you spend on that hobby. Or if you're like buying a gift for yourself, for example, watches, right? You also go and do research on the watch, the value. So in the same way, you would do that for music, right? Like there's a certain basic level of like of maybe that like business into it. So I think it's something to consider lah for everyone. I think a lot of time is like it's always like the expectations that will hinder the person from getting started. Is that me? It's like, oh my gosh, I need to do like a wonderful Excel of like everything is so, but like maybe not. Maybe I just need to get started.
Yes.
Simple one. And then as I go along, I can always like improve on it. Or if I don't improve, it's okay like anything that like there's some kind of tracker.
Yeah, as long as you have something, right?
Or like some kind of like a sheet, to make sure you kind of know, to monitor, It's also a good way to also like track your own growth, and also to be able to like, I think like budgeting is also good because it's like you can, then you know how much you need to put in or put out, Yeah, these are things, very, 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 I think it's very important lah. Yeah, I would love to share more about this with others who want to get started. Actually, this is something that I think if anyone, like even content creation also, is like you need to know like your costs and like not of course monetarily, but also like time as well.
Yeah, I hope that little conversation inspires some artists to like take that step, because I was also like, for me, it's very hard to encourage artists to change their mindset, because they kind of feel like, oh, well, I have like, it's coming from me as someone who's like in the business. So they're like, okay, why can't someone like you do it for me? But I really like when it's someone like an artist telling other artists. I think that's the thing that's going to make like the most impact. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you gotta like, rep that. Yeah, every artist is an independent artist. That's a good word there.
Yes, it is. It was actually told to me by an artist called Hollis. Yeah, she's really cool. Anyway, I think that concludes our interview for today. Thank you so much, Marcus, for joining us. You want to share about what's coming up next for you?
I just released my debut album, For You I Can, 为了你我可以, last year. And this year is more of like just continuing to release alternative versions of the tracks that I released. So you can look out for those. And to be honest, this year is quite interesting. I'm just like in the process of like writing and like working towards like what's coming up next. I'm trying to get more collaborations, done. So maybe like just working with different people, and whether it's artists or even like producers. So it's quite an open roadmap for now. Yeah. For and I'm excited lah. So if you want to follow me on this journey, you can follow me on my social media, I guess.
Awesome. I'll put your links down below. Thank you so much, Marcus.
Thanks.
The Level Up podcast is brought to you jointly by Blossoming Bridge Creative and Asian Pop Weekly. Be sure to follow on our socials at Asian Pop Weekly, and also check out our website if you're looking for more Mandarin or Asian music content. If you like what you're hearing on this podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow, and we'll see you on the next one.